Now, there was a point in time when I considered myself a reformist Muslim. I took pride in the fact that I'm a reform-minded Muslim. Although I was a proud Muslim, I saw the limitations and difficulties with the faith, and so I recognized the need for a sort of Islamic reform. And back in the old days of 2016, 2017, I loved to listen to pro-reform Muslims like Tariq Fatah. Tariq Fatah is not necessarily pro-reform. He believes in Muslims secularizing themselves. So you could say that Tariq Fatah is sort of pro-reform. In any case, the other Muslim pro-reform voices that I love to listen to include Zudi Jassi, Kanta Ahmed, Asra Nomani, Imam Tawhidi, and Rahil Raza. Imam Tawhidi as well also is not that keen on reform, although he does speak on a reform, but he doesn't really believe in a reform happening, and he recommends that Muslims secularize themselves and stop clinging on to old ideas and traditions. And so these are the people I love to listen to anytime I just feel bored. I want to hear someone speak about Islam. And these are the kind of Muslim speakers that I love to listen to. I could never listen to Mufti Menko or Numan Ali Khan. I love to listen to Muslim voices that are more grounded, that are down to earth, and are willing to speak their mind and not apologists. And once in a while, I do raise the issue of reform to normal, typical Muslims, the normie Muslims, and the response that I often get from them goes like this: oh, Islam is a perfect religion. Islam doesn't need a reform. Islam is not Christianity. What are you talking about? Without fail, again and again, these Muslims will often throw dig at Christians for reforming their religion. They'll say that unlike Christians, Muslims follow the religion as is ordered by God, and Muslims will not touch or tamper with their religion at all. And when I get this response, I'm often kind of surprised by these Muslims, and I'm often baffled at the audacity that they have given the reality. And so what I do in this case is I ask them directly, all right, if Islam is so perfect, then why is it that the Muslim world have been lagging behind the Christian world for the past few centuries? Why is it that Muslims are so dependent on the non-Muslims in today's society? And some of them will scratch their head, they are unable to answer, they just ignore me and walk away. But there are few of them who would sit down to further engage me and lecture me, and they'll tell me that, look, the problem with Muslims today is that they have abandoned the real Islam. And if Muslims go back to practice Islam like Muhammad did in the 7th century and his companion and their descendants practiced in the 7th and 8th and 9th century, that Muslims would give rise to another golden age of Islam.
And listening to these Muslims, I can't believe the degree of ignorance. I can't believe the shocking and astounding level of ignorance that will make them think that by turning the clock back to the 7th century, that this 7th century Islam would, by some mystical, magical, incomprehensible means, grant Muslim ultimate triumph over the rest of the world in every metric of civilization. That's just incomprehensible to me. That doesn't make any sense at all. It just doesn't. And in order for anyone to even conceive such an idea, they will have to be pretty dishonest, or otherwise pretty dumb. And I think I'm going with pretty dumb in this case, because these Muslims sincerely believe that if we move back to the 7th century version of Islam, we will shoot and advance past the rest of the world in every aspect of human civilization. Now, this appalling and astounding degree of dumbness and ignorance, I'll have to peg it down to the inadequacy of Islamic scholarship. Because guess what? These Muslims don't understand anything about the world and only read the world through the prism of Islam. They have bare-bone knowledge of the history of human evolution, nations, and civilizations. All they have been taught is limited within the Middle East and North Africa, spanning the period between the birth of Prophet Muhammad up to the present day. That's all they know. That's all they know about the universe as a whole. They tell you that when Muslims were committed to this 7th century Islam, okay, the Islam that Ayatollah Khomeini, Erdogan, and the Muslim Brotherhood want to take Muslims back to, they tell you that when Muslims were committed to the 7th century Islam, Muslims rose to global dominance, won every military conquest, and became the forerunners in the world in science and technology. And why were Muslims so successful? They tell you Islam, the spiritual component, Islam.
all of the political, socio-cultural, and environmental factors that might have facilitated and contributed to Muslim success in global dominance is lost to them. The only thing they recognize is the spiritual component, Islam. And I don't even know how to describe the level of dumbness or dishonesty in all of this. It will be like a cancer survivor patient who tells you that he survived cancer because of yoga. Yeah, yoga. All the irradiation therapy, the chemotherapy that he underwent during his bout of cancer is lost to him. The only thing he recalls is yoga. So if you have cancer, you do yoga. If you stop doing yoga, your cancer will return, or you are going to have cancer if you never even had cancer in the first place. That's how silly and dumb this sounds. I don't know if these people even think about what they are saying or the repercussion and implication of the kind of statement that they are making. And listening to these Muslims, I'm often appalled and shocked. I'm often confused. I try as much as I can to communicate with them, to inform them, and to show them their errors. But there is very little you can do about somebody who doesn't know, who does not know that they don't know, and who is not interested in knowing. I mean, just look at the sources, look at the religious text. They tell you everything. Don't they know that this earlier generation of Muslims who practice the Islam that they want to turn us to believe that the earth was flat, believe that the sun runs to a resting place every night, believe that the sky is literally a solid roof, and believe in 7 heavens. The earlier Muslims, the 7th century Muslims, believe in mythical concept of the universe. And I feel sorry for anyone with this mindset. I feel bad for anyone ignorant enough to conceive these ideas. And what makes this even more disheartening and depressing is that these Muslims subscribe to other ignorant and baseless concepts such as the scientific miracles of the Quran and Sunnah, which further deludes them and trap them within their 7th century Islam bubble. So no matter how much proof you lay before them, they continue to see the 7th century Islam as the ideal and what the Muslim world should aspire and return to. So that's about it. That's about the normie Muslims and their typical response whenever the issue of Islamic reform is raised. But what never ceases to amaze me is how they are kind of often protest Islamic reform when they keep screaming and typing in their keyboard that we can't reform Islam, we can't reform Islam. Islam is not like Christianity. The Quran is the literal word of God, not like Bible which was written by men. We cannot change the Quran. I'm like, how ignorant do you have to be? Come on, when Martin Luther King called for reforming Christianity, he did not speak about changing the Bible or anything. A reform is a revision of historical interpretation, a reinterpretation of the verses. That's all a reform is what the Muslim scholars have been doing even up to today, revising previous interpretation of verses. I mean, they do it often time when a verse seems to be scientifically inaccurate. You know, you look at verses in the Quran that deals with embryology. Muslims have reinterpreted those verses today in order to fit with sciences. But other verses in the Quran, such as wife beating, half the testimony of women being half of men, they don't touch this area. So why is it that verses that have scientific implication that seem to be factually incorrect, they are willing to address those verses? It's okay to reinterpret those verses, but for those verses that speak about social issues like penalties for certain crimes, they don't want to touch those verses at all. And so this double standard approach to Islam by the anti-reform Muslim is what never ceases to amaze me. It's like it's okay to go for reform on verses that have scientific implication, but for those verses that have social implications, we do not reform them. So it's not like they are anti-reform. They are anti-reform when it comes to reform with social and cultural implications. They are anti-reform in these cases, but when it comes to verses that has to do with scientific implications, they are pro-reform, because guess what? If the verses are not reformed in their interpretation, then they understand that it has a negative connotation or implication on the popularity of Islam. This is why they call for reformation, or they call for reinterpretation of verses. It's apologists. They are willing to go through all linguistic, acrobatic, and gymnastic in order to revise and reform verses that sound scientifically accurate. But verses that are culturally, socially troublesome or controversial, they don't have any issue with these verses. And so this sums up the basic premise of this video. Islamic reform is doomed because of two basic character flaws of normie Muslims. ignorance and dishonesty. And that's just it. This could have been sufficient for me to wrap up this video, but it just isn't. Years of observing and researching this subject have led me to realize how deep the rabbit hole goes. And if you speak about the doom of Islamic reform, you have to factor other components of the equation, such as the role the West play, as well as the role of the self-acclaimed Muslim reformists themselves. Now, I've already talked of the role of the West in my previous video. Contrary to what the anti-reformist Muslim think, the West is not interested in an Islamic reform. The Western elite want to see Muslims return back to the 7th century Islam, the form of Islam that is ultra-orthodox, ultra-conservative, ultra-restricted, to the point that it's so demanding on the average Muslim life that very little time and effort and energy will be left for the Muslim to invest into scientific, technological, and political pursuits that can set them in position to compete against the West. And so if you are a Muslim and anti-Americanism is your thing, anti-Westernization is your thing, then you should be naturally in favor of an Islamic reform. You should be. So if you are on a pulpit somewhere in Tehran and you are chanting death to America, death to Israel, while at the same time persecuting and suppressing reformist voices in Islam, then you are a tool. You are a tool of the European and American power whom you claim are at war with Islam.
And so this brings me back to the reformists. Islamic reform is doomed not just despite the reformists, but because of the reformists themselves. Go back to the names of those reformist voices that I opened this video with. Add other names like Eddie Puxel from 19.org, Dr. Ahmed Subhi Mansour from International Quranic Center. What do you find? These Muslim voices are residing all in the West. All of them, every one of them reside in the West. And I kind of get it. I kind of get why a Muslim reformist would choose to live in the West. I do not necessarily approve of it. I do not encourage it, but I kind of get why this is so. As a Muslim living in the West, at least you are guaranteed some protection when you express your freedom of speech to criticize traditional Islam and to call for reform. In the Muslim world, any scholar, any imam could just issue a fatwa against you, and a random fanatic terrorist Muslim can come to your house and kill you. Eddie Puxel, for instance, the Turkish authorities have issued arrest warrant for him just based upon his critical view of traditional Islam and his call for reform on his YouTube channel. If he had been living in Turkey, only God knows what would have become of him. You look at someone else like Dr. Ahmed Subhi Mansour, who was arrested on 2 occasions while he was living in Egypt. On 2 occasions, he had to flee Egypt to America to save his life because he could not continue to criticize and call for abolishing the Sunnah in Egypt. But there is definite consequence to this pattern of Muslim reformist emigration from the Middle East. What is a reform? A reform is a movement, and for a movement like a reform to succeed, there is need for reformist voices to organically facilitate and motivate the growth and accumulation of a population of like-minded, reformist-minded Muslim masses, until these masses attain a critical size or population that is able to shape public discourse and policy and to effect permanent changes. And the emigration of Muslim reformist voices from Muslim homeland breaks the natural process of Islamic reform. And the result of this is that the Muslim world is now bereft of Islamic reformist voices, and you are left with weak source, lame as cookie-cutter traditional Muslim voices that either couldn't care less about Islamic reform or actually opposed to Islamic reform. And then you have their normie Muslim followers who refuse to think for themselves and are glad to comply with whatever thought or speech that the authorities tell them. And then you have of course, the few pro-reform Muslim voices who are hiding in the closet, afraid to speak up for themselves, are either waiting for a sort of messiah to come out and speak for them, or have entirely given up hope. And so the end point in all of this is that there is stagnation in the progression of Islamic reform in the Muslim world. Now, when Muslim reformists move to the West, they have huge dreams, they have huge aspirations. They take consolation in the hope that Western liberal democracies would grant them all the freedom and all the protection to pursue their mission unwaveringly and unrestrained. And even more interestingly, in addition to this, they would expect some sort of recognition, approval, and perhaps even support from the part of the West. So, cardinal sin number 1 of Muslim reformists, that is counterproductive to their reform mission, taking the West as an ally and protector. And interestingly, it is a subtle reminder of verses in the Quran that warns Muslims against taking non-Muslims or disbelievers as allies and protector. I don't know how you choose to define Muslim or non-Muslim, believers or disbelievers. What I know is that the West, as defined by the market-dominant capitalists, the political class, and the oligarchs, do not in any way support Muslims or support Islamic reform. Period.
Now, when the Muslim reformist voices land in the Western world, they often enjoy an initial phase of honeymoon. I mean, they may get to publish their books, get invitation to speak at college campuses, may even be guest speakers on CNN, BBC, or Fox News. And then within a few years, these reformist voices just go radio silence. We stop hearing from them, we stop seeing their faces, and the only trace of them would be on social media where they are busy tweeting about the latest terror incident in Pakistan or Iraq. You look at voices like Tariq Fatah, Zodi Jasir, Majid Nawaz, and Imam Tawhidi. They used to be hot somewhere around 5 to 6 years ago, but all of a sudden, they vanish. It's like they never existed. Nobody even remember them today. Persons like Zodi Jasir, for instance, hosts a weekly podcast that is available on SoundCloud. And I doubt if even 10 to 15 people in the United States listen to his podcast, how much less in Syria, his home country. Now, you look at where these Muslim reformist voices are today, and you look at the pathetic state of Islamic reform up to today, it's apparent that these reformist voices have served nothing to Islamic reform, but have served as useful tool, pawn of the West in its foreign policies in the Muslim world. See, all of this leads me back to what I've said about the West previously. The West only cares about money and power, profit and loss, cost and benefits. When the West want to legitimize certain policies such as Donald Trump's Muslim immigration ban in 2016, it brings people like Zodi Jasir to offer support or sanction for such policies. When the West want to placate or suit the so-called xenophobe and Islamophobe after, say, a terrorist incident, for instance, it brings Muslims like Zodi Jasir, reformist voices, tell the West how much that they are opposed to Islamic terrorists and how much they want Islamic reform and how much they love and support the West. You see, it has never been ever about what these reformists want. It has always been what the West want from these reformists. And it doesn't matter whether you speak of the right wing or the left wing, it has always been the same. And you know what is even more depressing in all of this? Most of these reformers haven't woken up to the grim reality. They haven't. They are still asleep. You have persons like Shireen Kudusi who, after voting Republican, like Donald Trump in 2016, now turn around in 2020 to vote Biden, to embrace the Democrat Party in the name of fighting racism, fighting bigotry, fighting extremism and xenophobia. And I'm like, what? No offense, but if you're an American Muslim and you support the Democrats over the Republicans, then you are probably dumb. If you're an American at all, you think that one of these parties has superiority over the other, you are probably dumb. In fact, I would even understand if you say that the Republicans are better because they can't do much at this point in time. The Republicans do not have the institutional power that they used to have in the past. Most of the corporations and institutions are dominated by the left and the liberals at this point. If you as a reformist think that the American left, like the Democrat Party, the British left, like the Labour Party, and the so-called liberal voices, if you think these people are on your side, then you're definitely uninformed. You're dumb. These were the same parties, the same people who constantly beat on our head that Islam is a religion of peace, who told us that Islamic terror attack in the Middle East are as a result of ignorance, lack of education, poverty, and the so-called Western foreign policies. These people kept on justifying and excusing Islamic terror incident. They kept on telling us that Islam doesn't need a reform. They praised Islam over and over, and they told us that Christianity is even a more violent religion than Islam it is, which is debatable depending on how you look at it. But it was more of their own plot to kind of to appeal to Muslims to push vote instead of telling Muslims the reality of the situation. And it's the same thing you see ongoing with the West and minorities such as the blacks in America today. Tell them that they are oppressed, tell them that there's nothing wrong with them, that they just have a few problems that they could easily address, and that the real problem are the white people in America, the white people all over the world who have conspired and continuously oppressed and suppressed any progress that blacks in the world could make. A general character of the Western left is its emphasis on winning the minority vote, which makes it venerate, sanctify, and worship minorities as well as anything these minorities covet, in the case of Muslim, Islam. Now, if you are a Muslim reformist speaker who spend much of their time critiquing mainstream Islam, critiquing mainstream Muslim practices, pushing for an Islamic reform, then you are offending half of the population of Muslims. Yeah, half of the potential voters of the Western parties are offended by you. Now, what's happening with the Western left who are watching all of this is that they come to a conclusion. They decide that no, they cannot support or host a personality that half of the Muslim population do not support. It's all about a vote. They won't stand by somebody that will alienate half of their voters. So they are definitely not going to give you a platform. So I'm sorry, the Western left are not going to be of any use to Islamic reformists. They want apologies, people that much of the Muslim world can relate to it. 90 or 100% of the Muslim world will relate to an apologist. Those are whom the Western left are going to push on their platform. You as a reformist, you can get lost. So, in conclusion, the ultimate fate of Islamic reform and this fate is doom. You have generations after generations of Muslim masses that are ignorant of human history and history of Islam. And of course, they have multitude of charlatans and apologists to turn to whenever they have difficulties with Islam, so that they have no use or any appreciation for reformists. You have Muslim regimes in the Middle East like Iran, like Pakistan, like Saudi Arabia that will clamp down on Islamic reformists as they would on Muslim terrorists. You have Western powers that feign support for Islamic reform but are actually in opposition to it. And so we are left with a crop of soft-willed, weak-stamina, self-proclaimed Muslim reformists who have lost the plot completely and who have taken their enemies as allies. This is a joke. It's a tragedy. And the amusing thing is that I keep hearing people draw this parallel between the state of the Muslim world today and the state of the Christian world in the 15th or 16th century, just before the Reformation. No, there's no such a thing. And if the Protestant reformers ever came to this, all would have been lost.